What is up, everybody? It's hard to believe that February is already over. I feel like I was just recording my January Game of the Month video. But if you aren't familiar and you haven't watched this series, because it's only the second video after all, I'm going to be nominating a Game of the Month every month for the remainder of the year, so that when I go back to do my Game of the Year, I have only those games to choose from. So my rule for Game of the Year this year will be that I cannot choose a game that I did not put up for Game of the Month, because in my opinion, Game of the Year should be a game that stood out as the best in the month in which it was released. I don't feel like you can not be the best game that released in the month it released in, and then also be the best game of the year, because how then did you win? Unless, of course, there could be edge cases where a game received significant updates and became significantly better over time and improved, but I don't see that really happening. I've never thought of a game where it started out bad and improved to such a point that it became the best game of the year within the same year it released. Some notable examples are like No Man's Sky, which I would say, had it released in the state that it's currently in when it first came out, it probably would have been Game of the Year, but that took multiple years of improvement and iteration for it to get there. But anyway, so those are the rules. One game of the month. These are unscripted videos, so this is me just talking about my experiences with games this month, what I played, what I liked, some of what I didn't, and what I think ultimately came out on top as the best game. And I know that some folks are probably already typing a comment that I'm not going to talk about Hogwarts Legacy, but I am. I'm going to talk about Hogwarts Legacy insofar as I'm going to say that I chose not to play that game this month. Not just because of the implications of the feelings of our community and how the reaction would be had I chosen to disregard their wishes and play that game, because that matters more to me than anything, but also I'm just not a Harry Potter fan. I don't like Harry Potter. It's never been something I've enjoyed. I don't hate it. It's just not for me. Never has been. Long before, anything about J.K. Rowling came out, I just didn't like the series. I felt I was too old for it, possibly, or it just never clicked for me. Or maybe it was the fact that I had to sell the books when they were coming out, and it just grew a disdain for the series. I don't know why I don't like it. I just don't. So Hogwarts Legacy was never really going to be an option for me for Game of the Month, and I chose not to play it for a bunch of reasons. But yeah, so Hogwarts Legacy isn't in contention for me personally for Game of the Month. If you feel differently, that's fine, but it's just not going to be a game that I really choose to pick up for a bunch of different reasons. With that said, that means I'm not rendering judgment on it either way. I don't know if it's a good game or a bad game, and frankly, I don't care, because it's not a game that I want to play. But let's talk about a game that I did play and that I didn't like, that I hoped I would like, and that is Wanted Dead, unfortunately. If you're not familiar with Wanted Dead, on paper it seemed really cool. It's from Team Ninja, and it is like a stylized action game. You play as a female cop who wields both a katana and various guns, and it kind of disguises itself as a third-person cover shooter, though really it's a hack and slash. You can hide behind cover and you can be tactical and you can shoot, but somehow it's less risky to just run into the fray and cut people to ribbons. And when I say cut people to ribbons, I mean cut them to ribbons. There's blood, there's gore, people are getting dismembered, heads and arms and legs are flying off. And frankly, when I describe it that way, it sounds like a good time. But I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't have any fun playing it. It felt overly simplified. It was definitely a throwback to like the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation. And I do miss some stuff from that generation, but this felt like a particularly low budget game for even back then. It felt very one note, like just run, mash square, heal every now and then, and rinse and repeat. I know that there's more varied gameplay, but it was hard for me to get through the first few missions of this game. I was getting bored from the minute I started playing it. It's really unfortunate, because I think that with a stronger intro hook, maybe this game would do better, but I don't see Wanted Dead making a huge dent this month. What is going to make a huge dent, however, is PlayStation VR 2. So if you've been watching my coverage on the channel, you know that Sony sent over a PlayStation VR 2 review unit for me to check out, and that dominated most of the month for me because there were a lot of games to play. games that were good and games that kind of disappointed me. But out of the 30 games, I played a handful. There's no way I could get meaningful time with 30 launch titles or, 30 plus launch window titles for anything in a handful of weeks. A month isn't even enough to do all of those games. But I did want to talk about some of the notable games that I played, kind of all over the place in terms of quality. And I'm going to start with a game that I think is probably not going to get the attention that I feel it deserves, which is Altair Breaker. So if you haven't seen Altair Breaker, it's definitely a lower budget title. It has this feeling of kind of arcadey, samey, not super high production values, but it feels like it's trying to be a take on Sword Art Online. And I'm anime as hell. I really love Sword Art Online. And the mechanics of the game feel really, really good. So it's basically a hack and slash, and you go into instanced worlds, and you can play this with friends. Up to, I want to say, 4 people total in a squad. And then you travel to different dungeons and take on enemies. It's pretty cool, actually. Like, the transitions when you teleport into a place are very reminiscent of SAO. And in one hand, you can hold a sword, and in the other a shield, and you can change your equipment to where you have like 2-handed weapons, stuff like that. But the act of actually like closing your hand and seeing a sword appear in it in front of you is really, really cool. It's highly stylized in terms of the action. You go in, you try to land combos on enemies, you defend actively, and you can do one of my favorite moves in the game. You can swing your sword to hit an enemy up into the air, and then they will fly up, and you can lock eye contact with the enemy as they're in midair, and you'll see a gauge appear. And then if you hold your sword up, you will teleport above the enemy, and you can slash them down into the ground. And it's Dragon Ball Z as heck. I love the feeling of doing it. It's immensely satisfying to defeat enemies that way. And the swords are pretty cool. Like the actual combat and action of it's pretty fun. At the end of the day, it's kind of a simplistic loot-based sword fighting game. And I like that. I like co-op more than I like PvP. And having more co-op experiences, especially in VR, is really neat because VR can be a very isolating way to play games because people, you can't see around you. You're already isolating yourself from the world outside. So to bring people into the VR world with you is a really cool experience and one that I find immensely satisfying. And speaking of co-op VR, another standout title, possibly my favorite so far, is called After the Fall, and it's made by the same team who did another really popular VR title called Arizona Sunshine, which, being an Arizona person, I had to pick up and try years ago. And I really enjoyed it. Arizona Sunshine was a pretty good game, but again, would have been better with friends. And maybe they've added co-op to it since I played it, but it didn't have it when I first tried it. After the Fall remedies that by giving you the ability to play in 4-person squads. In fact, it's required to play in a 4-person squad, which to me helps with the whole survival horror aspect of the game because After the Fall, much like Arizona Sunshine, is about fighting zombies. So you have a pistol and you shoot zombies, and that's basically the gist of the game. You explore big, vast, open areas, and there are, various zombie encounters interspersed throughout, and these zombies can be pretty scary. Like, they don't just shamble, they run, they climb, they scurry along the ground, they walk on ceilings like Lickers from Resident Evil. They can get in your face pretty quickly and scare the ever-loving bejesus out of you if you're prone to that like I am. So I found that After the Fall was really fun because it took the edge off in a way because there were other people there with me, so I didn't feel quite alone. And, it helps because the AI is actually quite good. Like, it'll score headshots on enemies. So if you don't have other people with you, other human players, they will fill out your squad with AIs that are actually quite capable and communicative, so you don't feel like you're alone when you're playing this. And it has a really fun reloading mechanics. So you have 2 options. If you're not comfortable reloading your guns quickly, you can do a simple reload, which doesn't come with any damage modifier or anything like that. But if you're comfortable with VR and you've used it for a while, you can do a complex reload, which involves ejecting the cartridge from your gun or ejecting the clip from your gun, grabbing a clip off of your chest, loading it into the gun, pulling the slide back, and that gives you a 50% damage boost. which is something that I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with this. I haven't played more than a few hours, but in those few hours, I've had some of the most fun I've ever had in VR. And there's also a ton of gun customization you can do. You can find discs out in the world to unlock new weapons and new abilities and stuff like that. So there's a lot to it that I haven't yet peeled back and discovered fully, but it's a lot of fun. One of the best VR games I've ever played. I strongly recommend it. It was pretty high on my contention list for Game of the Month this month. Unfortunately, it just fell short for reasons I'll discuss later on. Moving on from that, I also played Galaxy's Edge, and if you watched my coverage of the headset of PSVR 2, I mentioned Galaxy's Edge as being a front runner for me as well. It continues to be a front runner in terms of the VR games that I played this month. Galaxy's Edge is a lot of fun. It puts you in the world of Star Wars. Specifically, it ties into the theme park. If you've ever been to Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland, this is almost like a companion piece that explains the lore around Batuu, which is the planet that, you're going to when you're at the park. And you play a smuggler who has to find things, and you can go back and learn stories and play those stories. But so far, it's a pretty fun Star Wars experience if you're into the non-Jedi side of things. If you're into, ideas from the ancillary characters in Star Wars lore. So this will give you an insight into how, smugglers work, basically like a Han Solo type of lifestyle without being involved with Luke or Leia or any of the other main characters. So a lot of blaster battles, a lot of exploration, a lot of droids. It's really cool. I like it a lot. I've played the first few quests. I still want to play a lot more of this. I will say that movement can kind of make me feel a little bit nauseated at times, but there are options for how you move. And I've since moved to the teleportation option, which is less smooth and makes me feel a little less off balance, let's say. But it's a good game. I recommend checking it out if you have a PSVR. I probably wouldn't buy a PSVR 2 for this game. But one game that did get movement correct is Horizon Call of the Mountain. And unfortunately for me, I'm not loving Horizon Call of the Mountain at the moment. It's a little bit of a disappointment to me. I mentioned, or I touched on it in my PSVR 2 coverage, but Call of the Mountain's combat is lacking, to put it nicely. I don't really love the idea of being frozen in place and just having to shoot arrows at stuff. That's not how combat in Horizon works to me. It feels like an exploration and climbing game with combat added to kind of spice up the game and keep it moving, keep it interesting. But it doesn't feel like combat is a primary focus. Again, there's a lot more to explore in this game. I still have hours and hours left to play before I finish it, but I'm just having a hard time wanting to play it. And I think that's where I'm having difficulty recommending it, because even as somebody who loves the universe and the world of Horizon, and seeing Aloy in-game was really cool. It was a really cool moment, and it is interesting to kind of see how short she is in comparison. A lot of people have been commenting how Aloy is short, but I do think they force a perspective there where regardless of your actual height, you're a set height in the game universe. Because I'm only 5'9", and I believe Aloy is maybe 5'4", 5'5", and it felt like much more than a 4 or 5 inch difference in height. So I don't think it scales to your actual height. It kind of gives you the illusion that you're much taller, unless you are really tall, in which case probably seems like the way the world looks for you normally. But it is interesting to have that perspective and to see somebody that I respect so much, or rather that I'm such a fan of in person. Like, Aloy is a real person for a brief moment in time when you play that game, and that's probably the coolest thing about it right now. But let's get into what I would like to call the cream of the crop, the games that really, really were in contention for me, that nearly made the cut. And I'm going to start with one that I've mentioned before, and that is Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Even though it came out right near the end of the month, it's a simple enough game that I was able to get a good feel for it by playing just a little bit of it. And I have to say, Return to Dreamland Deluxe is an absolute joy to play. I've had so much fun with this. It feels like an SNES platformer, and I mean that in the best possible way. It feels like one of the best platformers of the 16-bit era, and I do think that 2D platformers were at their peak in the 16-bit era. I don't think they've actually gotten better since then. I think the best games, the best platformers that have come out in the decades since the Super Nintendo have, at best, emulated the best games that came out during the Super Nintendo's lifetime, because the 2D platformer was the dominant genre for many years. And I feel that developers really honed their skills there, and they were very much in practice in creating these tight, well-made 2D experiences. And obviously following that generation, they moved on to 3D experiences. But Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is a gorgeous game. The updated art style is everything I could ever want from a 2D game. It looks and feels like really great 2D animated artwork. Although it's rendered in 3D, it's almost the same way I feel about the way Arc Systems has recreated Dragon Ball Z characters in 2D using 3D models, but it's incredibly accurate to the source material. Kirby feels like that. Kirby feels like Nintendo looked at their own drawings of the character and perfectly replicated them in an anime-ish art style that just that just fits, that just makes the characters look as good as they can possibly look. Every stage is gorgeous. The power-ups are fun. It's got just this cute aesthetic to it that perfectly fits the character, in my opinion. And I like it so much more than I like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, because I think that my expectations for what this game would be align far better. I was not expecting a AAA gargantuan effort, which I think I probably wrongfully was with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. But this game, I can't wait to play it with my kids. Unfortunately, they weren't home when I got it. They'll be home after this video goes live, and we're going to spend probably weeks playing this together, because this is going to be a game where I imagine my two daughters and I sit down and we just play it all night, until it's bedtime for them. And then I will have to practice self-restraint and not play it myself. I've purposely not played a ton of it so that I can play through the majority of it with them and experience it with them, because I think the 4-player multiplayer aspect of this is going to add to the fun. And it's a game that I don't feel my children will be, stuck or have issues with, and I'll be right there with them to help them play. I'm looking forward to playing this more than probably any other game I'm going to mention, even in the rest of the video, just because playing with my kids is probably my favorite way to play anything. But it is a great game. Not my favorite game of the month, but very, very close. I have no history with Kirby. I should say I have no history with Kirby's Return to Dreamland. I do, however, with the next game. Quite a long history, longer than you probably think. And that next game is Like a Dragon Ishin. That game just came out on PS5. So you may be wondering why I would have history with it. Well, Like a Dragon Ishin, or as it was known in Japan, Ryuga Gotoku Ishin, was a PS4 launch window title. And as part of my then, budding career in games journalism, I wanted to figure out how easy it would be to purchase a digital game on PSN in Japan on an American PS4. So when launch rolled around, I decided to figure it out. And the game that I chose was Ryuga Gotoku Ishin. And I played probably 15 hours of it. I went pretty deep, but ultimately I had to give up on it. The Japanese in the game was a little bit beyond my capabilities at the time, and I never ended up circling back, because as life has a way of getting away with you, especially when you have kids and they start to get older and they need more things, you just don't have time. But fortunately, Sega sent over a code for me to check out Like a Dragon Ishin on the PS5, and I picked it up, and the beauty of this remaster or remake is incredible. It looks so much better than I remember the PS4 version looking, and the story is utterly compelling. Obviously, they take the core characters of the Yakuza series, or now as it's called, the Like a Dragon series, and they recast them in ancient times, right, in feudal times. And so you see Kazuma Kiryu as Sakamoto Ryoji, and you see other characters from the series taking on these historical roles as you're basically trying to take down the ruling faction of the area you live in as part of the Loyalist Party. and the combat is still crazy over the top. The characters are still crazy over the top. There's still weird side quests, quirky stuff. You know, you run into a guy early in the game who's like hiding items in pots, and that's how they explain that you can just loot random things. There's just a random weirdo that like puts stuff in there for you to keep. You know, there's still wacky side quests. There's still all kinds of fun stuff to do that is evocative of previous games in the series, which makes sense because this is an old game. This is a 10-year-old game now that's been remade and released for the first time in the West in English. That alone is worth picking this game up for. I don't know if it's on Game Pass. I know that a lot of Yakuza games have been on Game Pass, but I picked it up on PS5. I've been having a lot of fun with it. Really fun to play. The feudal Japanese setting is right up my alley. I really love that kind of stuff. And the Yakuza series, if you've never tried it, or I guess Like a Dragon, that's going to take some getting used to. The Like a Dragon series is one of the better series out there that doesn't get nearly the respect it deserves. I feel like it's still kind of niche, but if you have an Xbox, a lot of those games are on Game Pass. I recommend trying them. Like a Dragon Ishin, very, very nearly made my list. It's one of the best remakes, remasters I've ever seen. The graphics feel on par with what systems can do now. I think that RGG Studio did a great job getting used to the hardware with Lost Judgment, and now we're seeing, you know, they're bringing other games to the current generation of consoles, which is really good. And I'm glad that this one finally got a Western release. But like I said, it wasn't going to be a surprise what I chose, and I feel like you would have been surprised if I chose Like a Dragon Ishin, because I haven't talked about it very much. And like I said, it's a great remaster, but if we're talking remasters, we have to tip our hat to the best remaster of all time at this point, and my game of the month for February, Metroid Prime Remastered. I mean, how could it not have been? This was a shadow drop from Nintendo, a budget title, and it has more effort put into it than I think I've ever seen put into a remaster of any game previously. And there's a great reason why this is Game of the Month. Metroid Prime is one of the most influential games in history. It took Samus into 3D and changed the way people viewed that franchise as a whole. And frankly, it changed how people viewed first-person games as a whole. Up to that point, first-person games were primarily just shooters. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of exploration. There wasn't a whole lot of lore. These, you know, Doom, Quake, those types of games, Unreal, they were just about blasting things and getting through to the boss, blasting the boss, and moving on. Whereas with these, you had a lot of exploration. You know, it took the Metroidvania formula, the search action formula, and perfectly replicated it in a 3D space, and a beautiful one to boot. One of the things that I think is really important is when you remake or remaster a game to capture the spirit of the original in all the ways that makes sense. And Metroid Prime in the early 2000s was a technical showcase. It was a game that showcased what Nintendo's hardware could do, and people were blown away by how good that game looked when it came out. An issue I had with Shenmue 3, and something that Kat Bailey from IGN had talked about on Twitter around the time that Shenmue 3 released, was that Shenmue 3 was missing the spirit of Shenmue, in the sense that one of the greatest things about Shenmue, one of the biggest things that people talked about around Shenmue, was that it was a technical showcase. It showed off what the Dreamcast was capable of. It blew people away with how good it looked. The same was true for Metroid Prime. The difference between Shenmue 3 and Metroid Prime was that Shenmue 3 did not push the envelope technically. It didn't show what current hardware could do at the time of its release. Metroid Prime does that perfectly. Metroid Prime makes the Switch look surprisingly modern for a system rocking a decade-old architecture. For something that is weaker than a PS4, it puts out a game that I would not be shocked at all to see even running on the PS5. It is that impressive. It looks that good. I'm amazed with what the developers were able to pull off here. And of course, none of that comes at the cost of compromising the game in any way. Metroid Prime is still every bit the Metroid Prime we remember from the GameCube, except better. Higher resolution, far better textures. In many cases, the actual geography or geometry of structures is enhanced. So you're not just seeing like upscaled textures and up-resed models. In a lot of cases, there seems to be brand new work done, brand new assets put in, which to me goes far beyond the point of a remaster. But if the rumor mill is accurate, the reason this is a remaster, and probably the only reason it's a remaster, is because it sits on the original code base. So the original coding done by Retro back in the GameCube era is still present here. It's just using Retro's latest version of the engine that they created for Metroid Prime. So all of that makes sense, but it really, really pushes the envelope of what a remaster can be, of what a remaster is. It's every bit as performant, it's every bit as good, it feels exactly the same, which is critically important with a game where the mechanics were already so close to perfection, and it adds a bunch of new stuff. You've got extras, you've got new control schemes, you can use gyro, you can use sticks, you can use a combination of both, you can customize the controls to pretty much work however you want them to, and it feels good no matter which way you do it. I prefer dual stick, but a lot of people prefer gyro. Some people are using a combination of both. Some people are using the classic controls, the way the game originally handled. No matter how you do it, it's all good in my opinion. Metroid Prime is stunning, and it's the best example of a remaster I've ever seen. It's an easy choice for February's Game of the Month because one of the most influential games of all time just got its definitive version, and it's been a decade, so I feel like it's okay to nominate it, and it's in contention for Game of the Year. It's so far Nintendo's pulling away with it. PSVR 2 came close, Sega came close, but Metroid Prime Remastered is my Game of the Month for February 2023. I can't wait to see where March takes us. I can't wait to see what games are available then for us to check out as we get ever closer to May, which, yes, Zelda's coming, and I can't wait to play that, but every month has surprised me with something interesting to play. I can't wait to see what we get next month, but I want to know what you choose for Game of the Month this month. What is your favorite game of February? Let me know down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out what you guys think. Am I right? Is Metroid Prime it, or is there a game I missed that you guys would rather see for Game of the Month? I'm interested to hear from you. Let me know what you think. But as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next month for March's Game of the Month. If you want to see more content specifically from me, head over to patreon.com/gvgaming, where I host the Week in Nintendo podcast each and every Saturday. But until then, I'll see you next time.